We are so grateful for the wonderful representation we have on the Housing Council. Thank you, and thank you to Todd for being the voice of business on that council. And we're heading into the home stretch. And at this time, we'd love to recognize our copper sponsors: Enbridge, Montana Banking Association, Montana Bioscience Cluster Initiative, UBS. We appreciate all of the support of all of our sponsors. Thank you. All right, so the Montana Chamber just does not represent business at the state level. We also work with our delegation at the federal level and enjoy our partnerships with organizations such as the U.S. Chamber. This morning we have Ron Eichschaug, Vice President and Chief of Staff of Government Affairs with the U.S. Chamber, and Todd O'Hare to give a view of what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Great, thank you. Well, the first thing that, before I get too far down this road here, I want to stress the relationship that we've got with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We're a small staff representing a big state. We have very good relationships with our entire congressional delegation, but we don't have the bandwidth to be able to lobby directly on all the different sort of issues that affect Montana businesses on the national level. And the relationship that we have with the U.S. Chamber is really a remarkable sort of relationship, and we rely on them a lot for helping us identify some of the issues that they're monitoring that affect businesses in sometimes some pretty arcane ways, some pretty minute details about some issues, and they've been really good about looking to us and saying, hey, can you help us connect with your congressional delegation? You have the deeper relationships than they do, and so we've got this great partnership, and we couldn't have the kind of reach into Washington, D.C. that we have without you guys, and so we want to really appreciate it. And I want to thank you. You came from Washington, D.C. You got here yesterday. We're going to be in the 30 below range here the next couple of days. I don't know who was passing around the straws that you ended up with the short straw on this thing, but welcome to Montana, and welcome back, and thank you for coming out.
Well, I tell you, negative 30 or whatever it is, I would find brisk and refreshing compared to the 14,000 degree pressure cooker that is Washington, D.C. these days. So it's great to be here, great to see you again. Things in Washington are really a mess. 2 out of 3 Americans think that we're on the wrong track. President Biden has a 55% unfavorable rating. Donald Trump has a 55% unfavorable rating. You got to work really, really hard, but Congress has a 72% unfavorable rating. So things are challenging in Washington. And one other little just situation, there's a lot of drama in Washington. If you look at what's happened in Washington, we saw that the speaker lost another vote yesterday. I've got it, it's a long list. In 2023, speaker was vacated for the first time in American history. There were 19 speaker votes. It's the first multi-vote speaker vote ballot since 1923. George Santos, you may have the guy who's probably headed to the Hoosgow. He was expelled. It was the first time a member was expelled in 20 years and only the 6th time ever. Also on the good news front, 3 members of Congress were censured. That's the most since 1870. And we've now had 5 rules fail. That's the most ever. And Congress only did 22 laws. That's 50 fewer laws than at any point in the last 20, 25 years. So things are going great in Washington. Yeah, great to be here. Negative 30 is wonderful.
Sounds like everybody's getting along just marvelously back there, right? And so we had our legislative leadership here this morning, and I think it's a refreshing kind of contrast, right? We had Republican and Democrat leadership here, and right, they spar, they duke it out, But we're able to still get some things done. And so as you look ahead into this year, and it's being an election year, probably doesn't help things, is there any hope that anything gets done this year? Or maybe that is our hope, that not much gets done.
So I think it's both glass half full and glass half empty. So look at the year that closed, 2023. They actually got some legislative accomplishments. Number one, there was this legislation that was kicking around for decades in the Senate and finally got over the finish line. The Chile tax treaty. Everybody watch for the Chile? Okay. So they got the Chile tax treaty. That was something very important, expanding opportunities for American businesses to invest in operations overseas. We know that rare earth elements, other critical minerals, really, really important. That got done. What else did Congress do? They kept the lights on. That was a big challenge. The lights may go off this month. We'll have to see. But it was a big challenge. What else did Congress do? At the beginning of last year, if we would have been talking last year, we would have been talking about the debt ceiling. A lot of Republicans were raising the issue of the debt ceiling as Congress is spending too much money. Anybody here think that Congress is spending not enough money? We know that Congress is spending too much money. Brinksmanship on the debt ceiling was rough. What did Republicans do? What did House Republicans do? They used it as leverage to get something. What did they get? Spending caps in fiscal year 24 and spending caps in fiscal year 25. They got some permit streamlining stuff as a deal. One of the problems for bringing more houses to the market, for getting new facilities built, is some of the environmental permitting delays that we see. So they tackled that issue. So last spring, the spring of 2023, they were able to use brinksmanship to affect some spending reforms and get some good things like permit streamlining. So Congress got some stuff done. Into 2024, the opportunities for Congress to get things done are going to be limited. Could they get some stuff on the R&D tax credit that expired now 2 years ago? We're going to know probably within the next week or two. We think that there's a deal to be had. Hopefully they can get it done. Is Congress this year going to be able to get the Farm Bill done? It's a lift, but hopefully they will be able to get it done before the end of the year. And then will they be able to keep the lights on? I would expect that they will, but they will use the opportunity as leverage for highlighting issues that I think are going to be important in this election, dealing with spending, dealing with leadership, and dealing with some of those kinds of things.
This R&D tax credit that you referenced, right? I mean, you give us some hope. We talked about this just yesterday, and Montana was designated as a regional technology hub for sensors and photonics, and so we're in the middle of applying for the next round of funding for that. And we chatted a little bit yesterday in the hallways about the importance of this R&D tax credit, particularly as we're starting to gin up new sort of economic activity around this sort of a technology. So you're giving us a glimmer of hope?
Yeah, there's a glimmer of hope. And frankly, I don't know where that glimmer of hope is because they've run through the deadline on this so many times. So the tax credit expired at the end of 2021, and if they had fixed it by the end of 2022, no harm, no foul. Woke up in 2023, they did not fix it, and we know that companies bet wrong. They bet on Washington being able to solve Washington-inflicted problems. We are now one of 2 countries that does not have an R&D tax credit, so yay for us in Belgium. We know that this is a problem, and there were chances to try and get this solved at the end of last year, at the end of 2023. We know now that, particularly on the big company side, when you have to file your 10Ks and all of that, and your taxes for next year, that not having this problem solved by the end of last year causes all new complications. With the way that the appropriations thing is staggered with a January cliff and a February cliff, there's sort of another 1 or 2 bites at the apple to solve this. What are the parameters of a deal? You fix R&D and the other tax credits, and you do something on the child tax credit. Okay, this is a Reese's situation. You got your chocolate and my peanut butter and your chocolate, let's make a deal. We know that the committees of jurisdiction are talking and are flirting and are close to consummating a deal. Then the step becomes, do Republicans and Democrats more broadly want to take that deal? So there is hope, but we don't know really how much hope there is. And I keep asking our tax lobbyist, and whether he had a good night or a bad night, it's either 60% we get it done or 40% we get it done. So I don't know, but the next couple of weeks are going to be telling, and it's really, really important.
Well, and I think Montana is in a unique situation where we've got Senator Daines on the Republican side and Senator Tester on the Democratic side. Senator Tester is up for re-election, obviously, and so, right, we're in an opportunity zone here.
Yes.
Right, to move this forward because there may be some additional incentive for like trying to come up with some sort of a deal.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that one of the interesting things is heading into an election year, it's usually beneficial to run on a track record of success. And, 50 fewer laws. I am a conservative. Congress doing less is generally speaking a good thing. We know that, however, that there are problems out there. And they did not have a spectacularly busy or productive year last year. Not expecting a lot to get done this year. And what does that cause? What do voters think about that when you're not running on a track record of, I was able to do X, Y, and Z? I think that's one of the big factors we're going to see in November.
So we need to temper our enthusiasm between now and November, right? We've got maybe a little glimmer of hope on a couple of deals that are important, but probably not much beyond that. November 2024, which is coming up upon us fast already. It's hard to acknowledge that, but we know how fast time is going to go. What happens after the election, right? We're going to see this big fallout one way or another. What happens then?
Man, I have no idea. But I look forward to maybe coming back to negative to whatever next year to talk about that.
Sort it out.
Look, I don't know. I think what's really going to be interesting is how the spring and the summer play out. Let's call a spade. What effect is having the Republican nominee campaigning from a jury box, whether that jury box is in Atlanta, New York, Washington, D.C.? What effect is that going to have on voters, on Trump voters, on Biden voters, on the four undecided voters that are still out there? What is the situation in Ukraine and Israel and Gaza? How does that affect things that are going on? One thing that we really didn't talk about is Ukraine funding. Israel funding is one of the things that Congress is going to have to sort out one way or the other, probably over the next couple of weeks. So what are all of these, what is the lack of laws getting done? What is the lack of ribbon cuttings going to do? All of those kinds of things. But we do know that this election is going to matter. Two really important things. Talk about last year and the debt ceiling deal. What comes back on January 1st, 2025? The debt ceiling. So whoever is president on January 20th, whether Republicans or Democrats control one or both the houses of Congress, there's going to be a vote in early 2025 probably on the debt ceiling. What also expires in 2025? The Trump tax cuts. The next Congress is going to determine the tax policy for the nation heading into the next decade. So there's an awful lot at stake in this election.
Yeah, there is a lot at stake. And so, right, I mean, we got business leaders from around the state here today. Ron, what would you advise our business leaders to do between now and the election and from there going forward?
Well, that's actually why I'm really excited to be here. Todd was doing the humble brag when we were talking about this, and he was saying that this is the biggest off-year legislative conference that you've done, which is pretty fantastic. Getting so many people in a room to talk about, tax policy, housing policy is really, really important. And I think it's important for us to recognize, and you sort of are talking about this and the importance of our relationship, is that the business community isn't doing as well as we were in the court of public opinion. So I got to meet Don Sturhan when he didn't have gray hair about 20 years ago. And, at that time, when you would poll Americans, their view on the business community wasn't great. About 45% of Americans said that they didn't want the business community to have that big of a voice in Congress and public policy. Now it's like 75%. So the benefit of the doubt that I think the business community got on, we'll just pass this bill because it's really, really important for the business community, is sort of gone. And we collectively as the business community need to make the stronger business case on why businesses matter. And investing in the connective tissue of the business community through organizations like the Chamber, the relationship that we have, the housing task force that you're talking about, to express the views of not just what's important to business, but why business is important, I think is really, really important. We know that business remains important. Oh, well, I'm paying too much for my drugs. Oh, I don't like what those big tech companies are doing. What do businesses do? We provide opportunities for our employees. We provide health care for our employees. We provide education for our employees, child care for our employees. We invest in our communities. We invest in our employees. That's really, really important. And making sure that decision makers and government officials know that. Third-party litigation funding doesn't get done by saying that this is an important issue for the business community. It's being creative and coming up with different ways to make that business case. That's so important. So it's great to see so many people who are willing to put their not gray hair on the line to turn their hair gray, like Don, I used to have hair, and others, but to put your blood, sweat, and tears into making the case for why these issues are important to the business community, why they're important to my business, and why they're important to Montana, I think is really important and something that we need to see more of, not just out of Montana, but out of all the other states as well.
Do we have time for a question or two? Great. And so why don't we go ahead and take some questions? This is a great opportunity to stump the expert. But I want to acknowledge, too, that we've got great relationships with the local chambers. Leslie Fiegel's here with the Livingston Chamber, John the Brewer from the Billings Chamber of Commerce, the Helena Chamber of Commerce was here yesterday, and so we work very collaboratively on these issues on behalf of the business community, and so thank you all for being here. We appreciate your support. So questions on something that might make you feel a little bit better about prospects coming out of Congress?
Bitter is okay too.
Bitter, better, whatever it might be. Oh no. Hang on a second, Tony. This ought to be good.
I'm curious, what's the DC take on the tester race?
Oh, that's a good question. The question is what's the DC take on the tester re-election?
I gotta be honest. Want to see? What's your take on it? Because you. So I think that I think that this race is certainly going to be among the most high-profile races that are out there. I think that one of the problems that's in Washington today is that so many people who are elected to Congress are elected as a Republican or a Democrat and have no opportunity for compromise. Republicans control 24 states. Across the board. Democrats control 17 states across the board. There's only one legislature in the country that has divided control. 30 states have supermajorities in their legislature. So outside of Washington, not only is there no incentive to be bipartisanship, but there's no need to be bipartisanship. The Republican whack jobs have to figure out if they need the really, really whack job Republicans on whether they're going to solve. The whack job Democrats have to figure out if they're going to talk to the crazy, crazy whack job Democrats. So in a state where you have a Republican and having a Republican and a Democrat in the Senate at the same time is unique in sort of a unicorn status. So it's going to be certainly something that we're interested to see. But I also think the challenge in Washington is that everybody in Washington thinks that they understand what's happening. And frankly, what we think about what's happening is far less important than what you think is happening. So any advice would be wonderful. We could talk about that later too.
So since we're sitting here in Montana, not necessarily concerned about the Canadian border, I would like to ask you about immigration, because I do think it's one of the issues that there seems to be more agreement on than Congress would like to admit. And I think it's really having a big effect on Biden's approval ratings. And so what can we do about immigration?
So I think we need to continue to do more of the same. I think we need to keep banging our heads against the wall with our legislators to tell them that this is a very, very important issue. I think that we also have to recognize that the situation at the southern border is worse than at any point that we've been talking about. And whether you're looking at that on the fentanyl scale, whether you're looking at that on the humanitarian scale, it's really, really bad. We know that commerce has been halted periodically because trains have had to stop because they've had to take the CBP workers off monitoring the trains to put them at the border crossings because that situation is just so awful. We also know that Chinese and Cubans and Africans and others are transiting to Central and South America to come through the southern border, which is a big change from Central and South Americans who predominated that in previous decades. We also know, being close to Canada, that lots of those groups are trying to come in through the northern border as well, and the situation is not just all maple syrup and waffles as it has been in the past. So, we have the situation on the security side, which has sucked a lot of the oxygen out. And yesterday on the House side, a rule vote blew up over spending and the border. There's a group of bipartisan senators that are trying to come up with an agreement on the border. Republicans have 49 votes in the Senate. What is the path to 50 or 60 in the Senate with just Republican votes? If you look at on the House side, the majority is now 2. How are you going to get all Republicans together on one package? And you have about a dozen members on the far right that are saying it's our way or the highway. So in the political climate that we're on, it's going to be difficult to do something more than just a little bit of border security now. Maybe the Senate is able to come up with something that can get through the Senate. Question of whether it can get through the House, let's assume that it does. But we're talking about housing. We can talk about ag. We're going to be talking about photonics in a little bit. All of those industries need workers. We know that the unemployment rate is below 4% now. We know that it was below 4% before the pandemic, and there weren't enough workers. There aren't enough childcare workers to take care of moms and dads who can go to work in the photonics sector, in the hospitality sector, in the ag sector, in whatever sector it is. And what we need to do is make sure that there are more Republicans, particularly on the House side, but certainly on the Senate side as well, that are willing to vote for something in immigration. On the good news side, there are more House Republicans that are willing to talk about visa waivers and things like that. There are some House Republicans who are more interested in that. They are also often drowned out by some of those very, very noisy voices. So we know that one of the solutions to the workforce shortage that we have is immigration, and we need a legal, robust immigration system. and talking about an argument of amnesty and all of these other kinds of things that didn't even make sense 20 years ago when it was coming up is not an answer that we need now. And to some degree, Congress ignoring this issue and not voting on something in the past generation has contributed, at least to some degree, to the problem that we're seeing now. Lots and lots of reasons for that. We can blame Biden, we can blame everybody. We also need to focus on solutions that are going to get us there and getting to yes on some votes on some of these things. So sorry for the long answer, but I think it's really important.
It's a great long answer, and it strikes me as like this is one of those issues that the business community is caught right in the middle.
Yes.
And is really paying a heavy price on this. I think about some of our folks that rely on B-1 visas and some of those sort of things for some of the hospitality work and some of that sort of work. And we've got this big plug, and no one talks to each other anymore. And it's just a fight, and it feels like it's largely just a political fight for political posture.
Yeah, it's a French vanilla issue. We hear, particularly in your part of the country, from the southern border to the northern border, in states with heavy-duty Republican delegations, we hear from the business community that we need immigration reform. And yeah, the makeup of the workers that you need is going to vary. So whether you like vanilla because it's more H-1B side, or French vanilla because it's more H-2B side, or temporary or ag, or whatever it is. But we can all agree we need more vanilla. We need more workers. We need all of the above. I was in a state. I'm not going to out them, but at the beginning of the situation in Ukraine, and there was a business in the hospitality industry who bought a hotel in Warsaw because there were so many people coming over because of the war, so that number one, he could do some humanitarian assistance to provide a place for the Ukrainian refugees to go, with the hope that some of those people would be able to come to his neighborhood and do some of the jobs that he was looking for. So, we know that the situation is crisis level in just about every community. And that was a square state. It wasn't, I'm not talking about Delaware. It was a state an awful lot like Montana.
Great. So, time for one more question. You don't think so? Oh, Charles, and we got to work on our signals, Charles.
I thought you were running the chamber.
Yeah. No, have you met my staff, right? Well, thank you again, Ron, for coming all the way from Washington, D.C.
And I just want to say again, thank you for the relationship. We're here to help. Charles says that in all his emails. Anything that we can do to help you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.